Ambassador Larson was confirmed as Assistant Secretary on July 31st, 1996. He had been acting Assistant Secretary for Economic and Business Affairs since March 18, 1996. As Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Finance and Development on October 1st, 1993. Until then, he was responsible for policy on debt, investment, economic development, including policy in multinational development banks and promotion of exports and investment. He had ad hoc responsibilities for negotiations with Japan on investment and buyer-supplier relations and for economic policies to support the Middle East peace process. From 1990 till 1993, Mr. Larson served as American ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. From 1987 till 1990, Mr. Larson was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for State for International Energy and Resources Policy. He served 1 year from 1986 till 1987 as Deputy Assistant Secretary for State for International Energy and Resources Policy. From 1984 till 1986, Mr. Larson was the Executive Assistant to the Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs. Earlier in his career, Mr. Larson was Counselor for Economic and Commercial Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Jamaica from 1982 to 1984, Deputy Director from 1980 till 1982, and International Economist 1978 till 1980 in the State Department's Energy Policy Office and Economic Officer in American embassies in Zaire and Sierra Leone. Mr. Larson has a PhD in economics from the University of Iowa. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Alan Larson.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. It's a great honor to be with you today and to have an opportunity to talk about how we are trying to make the world economy work for America. These town meetings evoke some of the earliest days of democracy on our continent. They do give citizens an opportunity to express concerns directly and to receive an accounting of what their government is doing. And I do want to hear your questions and concerns, but I've been asked first to give a brief account of the administration's policies to safeguard and expand American prosperity. Certainly, harnessing the forces of economic globalization is a central foreign policy priority. Globalization is the name I would give to the unprecedented, rapid, and worldwide flow of private capital, ideas, and technology, as well as goods and services. It's a powerful phenomenon and essentially a very positive one. It's fostered growing acceptance of American products, culture, and values throughout the world, and it's spurred the emergence of a global middle class. Global economic integration is encouraging people everywhere to demand the best, and that includes demands for democratic institutions that give people a voice in political decisions. The opening of once sheltered states and untapped markets has benefited nations and peoples all around the world. Despite the recent financial crisis, real incomes in developing countries are 50% higher than they were 15 years ago. And over the past 20 years, the poverty rate in Asia has been cut in half, and more than 350 million Asians have been lifted out of destitution and hopelessness. In Latin America, 1997 was the best year in a generation, with real growth rate of 5% and inflation of 11%, the inflation number being the lowest in 50 years. In parts of Africa, we're seeing very positive and encouraging signs of growth in a number of reform-minded nations. Globalization has brought very important benefits for Americans as well. The last 2 decades have been times of unparalleled prosperity for the United States. We're currently in the midst of the longest peacetime economic expansion in our history. Since 1993, over 14 million new jobs have been created. Median family income is up over $2,000. Poverty is dropping. Inflation and unemployment rates are at their lowest levels in a generation. And here in Baltimore, you have enjoyed the benefits of globalization as well. Nearly $19 billion worth of goods crossed Baltimore piers in 1998, including 15% of the entire containerized cargo of the United States. The Port of Baltimore generates some 18,000 direct maritime jobs in Maryland, as well as over $1 billion in revenues for business and government. The same global forces that are transforming and empowering nations and peoples also are, to be sure, posing some real challenges for all of us. Disruptions in economies halfway around the world have been felt here in the United States over the last 2 years, from aircraft manufacturers on the West Coast to wheat farmers in the Great Plains. Last summer, we saw the effects of the financial crisis on our own stock market. The drop in the stock market, combined with the increased risk perception in many debt markets, led to very real concerns that the availability of credit to businesses in the United States could be affected as well. And at the same time, some key industries, notably steel, have faced significant import surges that place real pressure on firms, workers, and many communities. So in short, for some in both developing and developed countries, global economic integration has raised fears and concerns. Now, the administration strongly supports economic openness and liberalization because these are the engines of prosperity. But at the same time, we're working very hard to ensure that the benefits of openness and liberalization are widely shared. I'd like to highlight a few of the key elements of this strategy. Last September, at the height of the financial crisis, President Clinton laid out a growth-oriented plan to deal with the crisis. The key elements of his strategy were to encourage very strong pro-growth policies in Europe, Japan, as well as North America, strengthening the ability of the international community to respond to financial crises, including by strengthening the International Monetary Fund, and finally, by giving very strong support to economic reform and restructuring in emerging market countries. Great progress has been made on all parts of this agenda over the last several months. Obviously, we need to avoid complacency, but I think we can take real satisfaction from the fact that global markets have moved away from the sense of acute fragility that was so prevalent last September. As we do move from a period of crisis management, it's important to consider ways of preventing future crises. In this regard, I'd like to comment briefly on some of the social and political foundations that can make economies more resilient and less likely to succumb to new financial shocks. Many discussions of the global economy focus on corporations, banks, hedge funds, and the administration has proposed a number of important initiatives in these areas. Bob Rubin has commented on those in the last few weeks, and if there's an interest, we could discuss them later. But today, in these remarks, I'd like to focus on what I regard as the most critical economic and social unit, the family. Family consumption is the largest component of national expenditure in most countries. Family investments, including the investments that families make in education, housing, and health, often comprise a vast share of a nation's capital stock. Family businesses are typically a resourceful generator of jobs and incomes. So if the world economy is going to work for America, as well as work for some of our closest partners around the world, it's going to have to work for American families. One of the things we saw in Asia was that sharp drops in family income and a loss of confidence by families in their economic future could cause or deepen economic downturns. We also saw that investments in people through education and health as well as effective programs to shore up incomes in times of crisis, can make economies stronger and more resilient. And that's why we've tried hard to strengthen these types of programs here at home, even as we use our influence to encourage other countries to make similar investments in health and education and to foster job creation through their own programs to encourage small and medium enterprises. Another lesson that's been driven home by this crisis is that questions of good governance, it is rule of law, the enforcement of contracts, combating corruption, all of these are central to a country's vulnerability to economic shock and to the resilience of its response to these shocks. And that's why we are working very, very hard in a number of ways to pursue these issues. For example, the United States has provided leadership in raising global anti-corruption standards. We know that corruption weakens financial systems and the rule of law on which growth depends. We're very pleased in the middle of February to celebrate the entry into force of an international convention against commercial bribery. Now, this treaty essentially internationalizes the core principles of the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, a law we've had in effect for over 20 years. And it makes it a prosecutable offense for businesses to bribe foreign public officials in order to win contracts. We think it's not only going to help clean up international commerce, but it will also foster a level playing field for U.S. companies. Secretary Albright recently stated in testimony to the U.S. Congress that nations that have built truly representative governments seem better able to ride out even severe financial storms. It is important for people to have a voice in the big economic policy decisions that affect their lives. It's very significant that countries like Korea, Brazil, and Thailand were able, through democratic institutions, to win popular support for difficult economic reforms, and that's clearly one of the reasons why these countries have done so well in digging themselves out of their financial difficulties. Let me turn for a moment to trade. The President has called for a new round of trade negotiations for the 21st century that will deliver market opening results on an ongoing basis. The key U.S. priorities for this new round include creating new market opportunities for farmers, including Maryland farmers. And to do this, we will be seeking broad reductions in tariffs and domestic supports that are linked to production. We're going to seek the elimination of export subsidies. Second, we're going to seek market access for services industries and their workers by obtaining specific commitments for liberalization in such sectors as audiovisual, construction, express delivery, financial services, and telecommunication services. Third, we're going to try to encourage rapid advance in science and technology by strengthening protection of intellectual property rights and by ensuring that new trade barriers are not erected in the new technology sectors such as electronic commerce or biotechnology. And fourth, we're going to launch further negotiations to reduce industrial tariffs, expanding to the maximum extent possible the so-called 040 tariff initiatives that basically eliminate tariffs completely. Finally, we are going to be seeking to change the World Trade Organization itself and making it more open and accessible to outside interests, and in particular to make sure that trade expansion occurs in a way that raises our standards in such areas as the environment and the protection of worker rights. When I give speeches on our economic policy, I don't often have an opportunity to talk about the important area of shipping. I think here in Baltimore it's a good opportunity to say a few words about international shipping. Without it, there can be no international trade as we know it. 95% of our imports and our exports move by sea, including such vital commodities as petroleum. Importers and exporters alike rely on efficient, safe, environmentally sound transportation services. Ports like Baltimore truly are the gateway to world trade. What you may not know is that the State Department plays a very active role in setting and implementing U.S. maritime policy. We work very hard in order to promote international shipping markets that are open to free and fair competition. We recognize that restrictions in some of the biggest markets in Asia and South America have put our shipping companies and their customers at a disadvantage. And that's why we work vigorously with the Maritime Administration and the Federal Maritime Commission in order to open these markets. As in other sectors, China offers enormous opportunities. However, outright prohibitions, limitations, and bureaucratic hurdles tightly limit U.S. carriers in China. Each effort to expand their business seems to require difficult political negotiations. But the government has helped our carriers gain important benefits. For instance, I got actively involved in our effort to secure Chinese approval for a joint venture between the Port of Tianjin and Sealand. We also encouraged the Chinese to grant official permission for U.S. carriers to operate routes serving both mainland China and Taiwan. And we're going to continue to press the Chinese to allow U.S. shipping the same access to the Chinese market as their carriers have here in the United States. In Japan, U.S. shipping companies have been struggling against entrenched ways of doing business that create costly inefficiencies. After more than 2 years of discussions, we have come to a very important agreement on improving Japanese port practices. This agreement set out procedures for U.S. carriers to apply for licenses in order to operate their own terminals in Japan, and it also improved the cumbersome system of so-called prior consultations with port business interests about operational issues. As a result of this, U.S. carriers have been able to reduce their costs in Japan. The Japanese government recognizes that its ports are losing business to the more efficient and less costly competitors around the Pacific Rim, and they have proposed a package of reforms, and we're, of course, urging the Japanese to deregulate even more quickly. In South America, Brazil is the major shipping market, and there, Secretary Albright and many others in the State Department have been actively involved in resolving a shipping dispute with Brazil over taxes. These cases represent only a very small part of the shipping issues that we get involved in the United States, and I hope that all of you will look upon the State Department as a resource to assist you as you confront issues. Before closing, I'd like to make a few more general remarks about the foreign affairs budget. This is a town meeting, and I think it's important for us not only to talk about what we do, but how much it costs to do it. The entire international affairs budget amounts to about $21 billion in year 2000. And it pays for all of the services that Americans need in order to be secure and prosperous and true to our tradition of moral and political leadership. For example, it covers programs to control weapons of mass destruction, to promote disarmament in troubled regions, and to contribute to regional peacekeeping missions. It provides for a whole variety of passport information, business, and safe haven services that American citizens rely on when they travel and conduct business abroad. In addition, it covers cooperation with foreign police, programs to eradicate drug production, and to bring to justice terrorists that bomb American facilities or threaten world peace and stability. In addition, it covers the support that we provide for new and emerging democracies and human rights in newly independent states of the former Soviet Union, as well as in Central Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. It provides relief for victims of disasters, for victims of civil strife, and others facing life and health-threatening emergencies. It protects Americans from toxic waste, ozone layer depletion, devastating new diseases, and the consequences of exponential world population growth. Now, the amounts that are involved in this are not trivial, and yet at the same time they amount to about $80 per person, $320 per year for a family of 4, which is less than the cost of basic cable TV service and about half the price of an average automobile insurance premium. I would like to think of the international affairs budget as an insurance premium, and I hope that you would agree, at least after the series of discussions that we'll have here today, that the stakes involved in maintaining American leadership in the world are too high for us to fail to keep this insurance premium in force. To sum it all up, at the State Department, our job is to advance American interests overseas. When we do it right, we advance prospects for every American. We seek, in my area of responsibility, to improve the global economic opportunities that are available to us, and by doing that, we ensure strengthened growth here at home. At the same time, the support that we provide for open markets and free trade promotes prosperity worldwide, and this is a prosperity that is lifting millions into the middle class, that is reinforcing democracy, that is building the global economy of the 21st century and helping to make a world that's safe for our children as well as ourselves. I deeply appreciate this opportunity to be here, and I am looking forward to fielding any questions you want to throw this way. Thank you.
When we think of the State Department, we usually think of foreign relations in terms of politics. I personally never thought how much involved in shaping the economic policy of the country. And in this regard, your speech was very informative, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for that. As the Ambassador said, he will entertain some questions, and for that purpose, we have 2 microphones on both sides of the room. So please utilize these microphones so we can avoid repeating the question. First question.
Mr. Ambassador, it's clear the Clinton administration believes very seriously that economics underpins foreign policy. However, in the case of Russia, where we're trying to build a strategic relationship, our companies have a very difficult time with laws, with tax laws, with all sorts of problems. I wonder if you could go into detail the kinds of things your department is doing to create a more investment-friendly atmosphere in Russia so that could ultimately underpin an improvement in U.S.-Russian relations.
Okay. I think it's an excellent question, and I think in a way it's a sad irony that governments in Russia that have thought that they wanted to be somewhat nationalistic and protect Russia from undue foreign influence set Russia off on an economic policy where they were not really very helpful to foreign investors who were prepared to plant billions of dollars in their own country and maintain an ongoing presence, and instead followed a policy that ultimately made them very dependent on very short-term volatile flows of foreign money that in the end turned out to be their economic undoing last summer. We have persistently pressed with the Russian authorities for several years the importance of having a good, stable, and fair environment for foreign investors. We negotiated, for example, a bilateral investment treaty that would protect American investors against discrimination, but it got hung up in the Russian Duma and has not passed after years. We have pressed in a number of different channels, including the channels that the Vice President has had with successive Russian premiers, the importance of them addressing issues like taxation, as it affects foreign investors, and in the energy sector, the production sharing agreements that form the basic contract law provisions for investors in that industry. There has been some success or some forward movement in this last area. The Duma actually passed a production sharing law that is helpful, but it's necessary now for them to go about implementing it, and that's proving to be a very slow process. But I would first of all agree with the questioner's premise that this is an extraordinarily important area for the future of Russia. It's one that we've been given a lot of attention to. We've made incremental progress, but far less than I think is in our interest and far less than would be in the interest of Russia itself.
Second question.
Yes, my question deals with the environment and energy related to Africa. In Africa, there's a lot of gas fields being flared off, causing a lot of pollution. There is a system available to turn gas back into liquids. Is there any investment maybe coming from the United States to deal with the problem and also to invest in the system?
Again, an excellent question, and I think I have somewhat encouraging news for you. Just last week, I was at a conference in Houston that was sponsored by the Corporate Council on Africa. The theme of it was basically attracting capital for Africa. I had the privilege of being a kickoff speaker on a panel that, well, the panel didn't include President Bongo of Gabon. President Bongo of Gabon gave a speech at the beginning and then stayed on for the beginnings of this panel that was specifically devoted to how you can encourage more energy investment. And one of the principal topics was how you could get more investment into the natural gas sector of the African countries so that this natural gas, which is being flared because it is considered a byproduct of oil production, could be put to better use. Now, a lot is going to happen for that to occur. First of all, there will need to be some improvements in the investment regimes of the countries involved. Secondly, natural gas obviously is a different type of project from petroleum. You have to have either the grid wherein you're going to distribute this natural gas within the region, and there are plans underway for the development of gas grids in West Africa. Ghana is playing a crucial role in the development of these gas grids. Or you need to have facilities to export it, usually through liquefaction, which is a very, very costly enterprise and requires the development of a so-called fuel train to carry the gas to some other destination, facilities on that end to turn it back into gas and for use. But the interesting thing about all of this is that executives, very senior executives from all of our major petroleum companies were there at this meeting talking to energy ministers and finance ministers as well as presidents of African countries about how they could make these arrangements to use that natural gas and to hit another theme just in a sentence, to turn the natural wealth of Africa into what I think most of us would regard as the true wealth, that is, investments in people so that you have the type of educated, trained workforce that can produce wealth that will last into the future. And I think it's very exciting, and there are some important first steps being taken.
Next question.
I speak on behalf of the Maryland Coalition to End the U.S. Embargo of Cuba, and I'm in support of the Mayor and the Council of Baltimore and the Orioles Initiative to extend friendship to Cuba. I'd like to know how much longer do we have to wait and what has to happen in Washington before the United States will end its economic embargo of Cuba?
Well, I think that it's a very difficult question to give a specific answer in terms of, what is the likely timing for an end to this embargo. I think a lot of the answer to that question depends on decisions that the Cuban authorities themselves are in a position to make. Our Cuba policy is a very difficult policy. I won't hide that. It's been a difficult policy for me as I've attempted to work with European countries that have a different view. But one of the things that we have accomplished over the last couple of years is to get greater harmony in the positions that we and the Europeans and the Canadians have taken. I think all of us agree that the treatment of human rights in Cuba is an absolute disgrace. The fact that there are 4 people in jail now whose crime is to call for an end of a one-party dictatorship reflects the depths to which the situation there has sunk. And I think that I'm sure that in raising the question, you weren't in any way advocating the policies or endorsing the policies that Castro and the Cuban government have followed. But it is difficult to figure out the right way to proceed when that type of abuse of human rights is going on. In January of this year, we did take a few limited steps to try to breathe a little bit of air and light into the Cuban system. We made it somewhat easier for air flights to proceed between the two countries. We increased the amount of remittances that could be transmitted back to Cuba. We made provisions for the export of commercial sales of food, provided the food went to private entities and wasn't going to be distributed and controlled by the Cuban government. It's interesting to see that those types of steps, which I think the questioner would undoubtedly regard as very limited and incomplete and not enough, have also been very controversial with other parts of our society. And I think the key, wherever you are on this particular issue, the key to moving forward is to see the type of movement in Cuba that improves the situation on political rights and creates the types of possibilities that would warrant and would allow support for a somewhat different economic policy.
Next question, please.
Mr. Secretary, I don't know whether this is appropriate, but I'll ask the current situation in Kosovo, for example. In a recent article in the Sun paper, they mentioned something about withdrawing money from the Social Security Fund to fund the effort, the military effort. And I've only seen that once in the paper. My question was, with the idea and the discussion we've had over the years about the baby boomers not having enough in the Social Security Fund, lowering of tax rates, and so forth, have you heard anything or anything about this, withdrawing this money from the Social Security Fund?
I'm not the expert on this, but I know enough about it to be dangerous. So I'll give you a partial answer. We know that if we're going to succeed in ensuring that we never again have to send American men and women to this part of the world to stop ethnic cleansing and to safeguard a peace, then we're going to have a new structure built in Southeast Europe. And the administration has been talking to the Congress about the funding requirements for that. There's discussions about, on the military side, which the Defense Department is involved in, about sort of replenishing their stocks after the effort that they're making. I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't know anything about that. But on the economic side, we are interested in doing what it would take to create a more prosperous, a more democratic, and a more secure region in Southeast Europe. We recognize that the primary responsibility for that, insofar as funding goes, will have to rest on the shoulders of the European Union, because this is, after all, in their backyard. We also recognize that the existing international economic institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development also will have a prominent role. But I would argue that the United States has to be present as well, and that we have to be present in more than a moral support capacity. And this is going to require some additional funding that's going to have to be offset or funded in some way. And I think this is the reason for the article or the speculations that you've heard. I can't tell you where this money would come from. I can tell you that the amounts involved for the U.S. contribution for the economic reconstruction in the Kosovo and Southeast Europe is really very, very modest, and that we are going to insist that the Europeans bear the predominant responsibility.
Next question.
Could you address the impact on our economy of a negative balance of payment? That's the one question I have. Then the second one has to do with NAFTA. Have you given any consideration to creating one currency a la euro dollar between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico?
Okay. The balance of payments question is tricky because there's a little bit of a question of causality. Obviously, all else being equal, having a situation where we're selling less abroad than we're buying, where we're selling less abroad than others are buying of our own products is not something that we regard as a particularly healthy or good thing. And we have been concerned about the fact that that the current account or the trade deficit of the United States is rising. It is, however, important to look at the reasons why this is the case at this particular point in time. The United States had a phenomenal period of growth over the last 2 quarters, on the order, above 5% on average, while the rest of the world has been extremely weak, particularly Asia, but also not particularly great growth in Europe, and of course Japan has been weak as well. So I believe quite firmly that the fact that we have a large and growing balance of payments or current account or trade deficit right now, ironically, is a result of our economic strength. The fact that we've been able to keep our economy strong, our consumers and our businesses are spending money and buying, and the rest of the world isn't. Now, for this to go on indefinitely would be a bad thing. And we are taking steps to open markets abroad to try to revitalize growth elsewhere so that our trade balance could be more nearly even. But I think at this particular point in the history of the global economy, we can thank God that we are in a position to be running the type of trade deficit we are, because if we weren't, it would mean that our economy was slower, our unemployment rate was higher, and that we were in a much worse economic health than we actually are. On your second question, I don't think at this particular point in time there's an immediate prospect of having a single currency unit for North America. I think Mexico in particular is going to find it in its interest for some time into the future to have the type of system it has now, where their currency floats or drifts slowly downward. There has been some interest on the part of other countries in linking themselves formally to the dollar. Larry Summers, the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, has made a few speeches where he set out our own policy on this, which is essentially that we're open to considering it, but we are not open to considering having other countries have any particular say in the management of the dollar or the role that the Federal Reserve would play. In other words, if a country were interested in doing it, it would have to take whatever swings in the dollar and whatever swings in U.S. interest rate policy came as givens. But this is something that I think is where it's an issue where there's increasing interest around the world. It's not going to move very quickly, and I think particularly with respect to our immediate neighbors, it's not something that's in prospect right now.
Mr. Larson, in your remarks, you mentioned that the State Department does have a budget to support emerging democracies around the world. I'd like to think you will agree with me that Nigeria is an important emerging democracy, and I hope you can give me a specific response to my answer. What kind of support would the United States be providing to Nigeria as an emerging democracy, and maybe without revealing all the specifics for national security purposes, but how would you appropriate this particular budget in supporting Nigeria as an emerging democracy?
Okay, thank you for the question. We believe that the steps towards democracy that have taken place in Nigeria over the last year are one of the most encouraging things that we've seen on the global stage. And we have given a lot of thought in the State Department about how we could make a concerted effort to support these steps forward in the political as well as in the economic area. My boss, Undersecretary of State Eisenstadt, made a trip to Nigeria within the last month or so. We're planning on another trip by his partner, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Tom Pickering, who also is a former ambassador to Nigeria. On the economic side, we have told the Nigerian authorities that we're prepared, if they find it useful and interesting, to work on a comprehensive economic partnership, to have a comprehensive economic dialogue that could explore in every area how we can strengthen our cooperation between us. I think one of the first steps in Nigeria will be the setting forth of an overall economic framework, the decision on the part of the government as to whether it wants to get into a program with the International Monetary Fund. There is a very, very large debt overhang in Nigeria, large debts to external creditors that really can't be paid without a restructuring and a refinancing. And I think there's a willingness on the part of Nigeria's creditors to consider that type of arrangement. We have also been exploring with some of Nigeria's other friends the possibility of some type of Friends of Nigeria arrangement where all of the donors and all of those who are interested in seeing Nigeria's move toward democracy succeed could concert their efforts and make sure there's some coordination. I'm not in a position today to give you a figure, that we've got X amount of money in our hip pocket that we're just waiting to spend on Nigeria. But what I can say is that all of the forces and minds that we have in our government are pooling those resources and minds in order to figure out how we can play as supportive a role as possible, recognizing, of course, that it's the new Nigerian authorities themselves that are going to have to set the pace and choose the directions.
Yes, sir.
I think I heard you say something to the effect that we are being protected from the exponential population growth. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and how you're doing it and what is your concern?
Sure.
It's going through the roof, as I've seen on some graphs.
Yeah, I can, although, my area of expertise is economic policy, and the reference that you cited that I made was when I was sort of giving a quick summary of other areas that the State Department is involved in. So I'm not going to be able to give you too many specifics on the types of programs that we pursue. The ones that we pursue are, I think I'll offer you one personal comment, though, and I'll also offer the commitment that when we meet up afterwards, you could give me a card or something, and I'll have the people that do know about this mail you the specific information. I do think that, the mayor commented at the beginning this very interesting quotation from Peter Sutherland about what the world would look like if you compressed it into 100 individuals. And one of the things that we have discovered in our analysis of economic development is that one of the most important things that we can do, one of the investments we can make that has one of the biggest payoffs, is investment in primary education, particularly primary education for girls. Because what happens when you do that is you not only give people a real start, and in many countries it is the girls and women that are the primary economic agents, breadwinners, if you will, but you also make it far less likely that that these girls get into situations where where they are contributing to an explosive growth of population. And I think we are doing more in the area of education and things like that, but my own personal emphasis as an economist is just the good we do by promoting economic development generally and by doing it in a way that emphasizes investment in kids and particularly investment in girls.
Yes, sir.
I have, Mayor Smoke spoke about these 100 people, and only 6 people control approximately 50% of the world's wealth. That makes me very sad. You're talking about democracy, and I wonder if you're just talking about political democracy or economic democracy, where some of the benefits are spread throughout the world, and I doubt it very much. So one president said a long time ago, I think it was Coolidge, the business of this country is business. Now, are we going to go ahead and make some investments in people, consumers? If we had more money, if they had more money, for example, in the third world, to buy goods, because if they had unions or some kind of support for higher wages, they might be able to buy some American products that we can't sell now. What is your comment about that?
Okay. My first comment is that I think that all of the evidence and information that I have suggests that the way to achieve a greater equality of income around the world is by growing the pie rather than redistributing what we have now. In China, the author of the current Chinese economic reforms was quoted as saying, well, I have 2 choices. I can either redistribute poverty or I can redistribute wealth, and I think I'll choose to create and redistribute wealth. So I think our overall emphasis has to be on how we can encourage growth and economic development all around the world rather than getting involved in an exercise in global income redistribution. Having said that, I think that there are a number of important things that we can do that would help spur growth on an equitable basis. First of all, free trade. I do think that an open trading system is something that's extremely important for the development of the poorer regions of the world. Secondly, I think that making sure that there are, in those developing parts of the world, adequate investments in people is also important. At our urging, the international development banks, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, have doubled the share of the amount of their resources that they're investing in people and social programs for this very reason, that it's good economics as well as good in terms of social justice. Third, I do think that it's important, and I have stressed in my trips around Asia, that it's important to go for a growth model that is based on equality of opportunity in the economic, equality of participation, and that means changing a lot of the practices in some of these emerging market economies where there was an emphasis on cronyism, where there was growth that occurred in a manner that was very unbalanced and where the rich got very, very rich and the poor didn't always get that better off. Finally, you mentioned free trade unions. We have made a major push over the last couple of years to get increased respect for internationally recognized labor rights, including the right of association and the right to organize. We actually got the International Labor Organization to agree for the first time, all countries that participate, and agree to the basic international core labor standards, which include right to organize, right to associate, as well as non-discrimination and, no slave forced labor, no abusive child labor. So I think we are making progress there as well in getting the notion implanted that it's important as development takes place to have this include an expansion of economic rights for all people and not just have it be growth for growth's sake.
Yeah,
Next, please.
Right, Mr. Ambassador, has there been any modification on the stance of the EU regarding restrictions against the importation of U.S. livestock and livestock products because of our use of growth promoters?
Well, the news this week has been pretty bad, as you may know. We, just as background to the question, the United States, after exhaustive studies and reviews by the appropriate authorities, including the Food and Drug Administration, has allowed the use of certain types of natural growth hormones in the production of beef in the United States. Europe had pursued a ban on hormone-treated beef that was based on no scientific evidence that this was in any way harmful. And after repeated cases in the World Trade Organization, which they repeatedly lost, there was finally a judgment made this spring which would have required them to either end their ban, to provide compensation, or in some way make a resolution of this with the United States. This week, the weakened European Commission, which has essentially been fired but is still there in a caretaker role, had a meeting where there was no decision, as far as I can tell, and yet certain of the commissioners walked out of the door having made no decision and announced that they were going to pursue a ban, and announced that they had just found some new study that, in their view, raised important new issues about the health of hormone-treated beef, studies that we haven't seen yet, and which we have extreme doubts about, to say the least. At this point in time, it's not at all clear how this is going to sort itself out, but the one thing that I feel very strongly about is food safety is far too important an issue to politicize it, to treat it as a political football. I don't think that there's any percentage for anyone to take steps that would be seen as inflaming public fears. Now, if there are risks associated with any particular type of food or food additive or things of that sort, then it is important for the agencies in our governments that are entrusted with responsibility for the protection of all of us look into these seriously. The fact of the matter is we have a very good system for doing that in the United States, and it has the confidence of consumers. The Europeans don't have a good system for doing that, and I think that's one of the reasons why some of these groups have been able to play with the concerns of European consumers.
Next, please.
Mr. Ambassador, you do not grow bananas in Alaska, nor do you grow bananas in Florida. And you have claimed then that the family is very important to avoid or prevent shocks. Why should your government insist that the World Trade Organization prevent European community countries from allowing them to grant preferential treatment to those very Caribbean territories that have been supporting you historically, because this part of the world, the Caribbean, is very important to your security interests. When these bananas are not grown and people cannot get money to pay for the very education that you talk about, and business and health, do you think then that the family would remain intact? Isn't this a contradiction? I care for you to comment, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your candid question. I spent 2 years of my life as one of our representatives in Jamaica, so I speak to this from a personal as well as a professional point of view. It's very important for everyone in this room to understand that when the United States challenged the preferential European banana import regime, we didn't do it because we thought that that we wanted to damage Caribbean countries. We didn't do it, in fact, about bananas at all, but we did it because the Europeans had insisted on conducting this regime in a manner that not only discriminated against other banana producers, such as those in Central America, but worked in a way that gave a virtual monopoly to European marketers. The Europeans knew very well that there were a variety of ways that they could have extended preferential treatment to Caribbean producers of bananas if they had wanted to, and not violated the rules of the World Trade Organization. But year after year, they chose not to follow those paths because they insisted on conducting a regime that gave high monopoly rents to certain favored European importers of bananas. They lost case after case in the WTO, refused to change the policy. And it was only this spring when they were confronted with a final definitive decision by the WTO that they recognized that they had been following a path that not only was harmful to the World Trade Organization, but was also harmful to the Caribbean countries because it was creating a great sense of uncertainty and insecurity about the future of banana production in some of these Caribbean islands, which, as you point out, this is just absolutely essential to the livelihood of these countries. We have made perfectly clear, and I was with Secretary Albright when we made this perfectly clear to the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, that we are prepared to work with Europe on measures to strengthen the economies of these Caribbean countries. We're prepared to discuss with the Europeans how they could have a banana import regime that would give some preferences to Caribbean producers, but to do so in a way that is not discriminatory, in a fashion that is inconsistent with WTO trade rules.
The ambassador's remarks, as well as his answers to the questions, were very informative, and we thank him for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.